Go.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah. Barev na Adonai Eloheinu divrei Torah b'fidu fi amcha beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu b'tzeitzenu b'tzei amcha beit Yisrael. Kulani yodea shemecha v'lomdei toratech lishma Baruch atah Adonai l'mei Torah l'amo Yisrael. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'achad banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Mate, just ask one thing, is that in future, if I'm halfway through and you haven't recorded, it's probably less of an issue than having an interruption on the bracha and using Hashem's name again, but your intention was correct that we hadn't recorded, but we just rather let me mess.
But you zapped in so fast. I know. You zapped in so fast, I wasn't expecting it. You know what I'm saying?
I'm with you. I'm saying if I make that mistake again, just let the brachas right, because the brachas are very serious. We're doing a bracha for the learning, and we can always superimpose it later.
Okay, then I'll just copy the other one for the next time.
Okay. Thanks, Kabb.
Okay.
All right, so we go in the Mishnah Berurah. We're still on 178. This is a long Mishnah Berurah. The Gemara is easier. So we're basically dealing with two cases where you still need to make a bracha in the second place that you're going to, even though people remained at the meal that one returned to, and even if one eats bread, mezonot. So we're going to just deal with the first issue. So what we said before is that if there are people that stay there where you're eating and you change locations and you come back, they've continued the meal for you. But there are exceptions. If you didn't eat a kazayit in the first place, then you eating in the second place is considered a whole new eating. And you make a new bracha rishona there, even if people remained in the position where you came back. So and even when the same is true with bread and mezonot. So you have to always have a kazayit before one leaves in your initial place. I'll give you an example. Wow. You started eating a salad with other people at a restaurant, but you had less than a kazayit. When you realized, guys, can you still see me? It says my internet connection's unstable.
Yeah. Fine.
Yeah. Okay, so you're eating a salad with other people at a restaurant, and then you had less than a kazayit when you realized that you left something in the car. And when you went to go and get it, well, obviously that's a major change of place. You would you usually returning to that place where people are eating avoids you having to make a new bracha rishona. But since you never actually ate a kazayit, it's as if you never started the meal at all. And you'll have to make a new bracha on your return. Okay. If you started eating a biscuit in your house, for example, and then went to the office, if you only ate less than the kazayit at home, your bracha doesn't follow you. You'll have to make a new bracha at the office. Okay. So it's not necessary to eat a kazayit when it's going from room to room. It's only when there's a real change of place, not in the same room or a room that you can't see in the view, but is actually part of the same area. So if you ate less than a kazayit in one room and then moved to another room, or anything under the same roof, you don't make a new bracha. Since it's under the same roof in your own place, you've not actually changed the place, and therefore it's considered as one eating. So that being said, it's always better for you to eat a kazayit after making the bracha before leaving the first room. Okay, so that was by Rabbi Daniel Brody. Great, we're going to hit the Gemara. Now, one thing to bear in mind is that it was a little bit slow last week. We missed a session, which is while we're still on 13b2. And we had some internet connectivity. Marco, you never had the joys of seeing it because we edited the videos together. Ask the guys what it was like pulling toenails.
I could see.
Yeah,
I could see the change.
Yeah, there were a lot of changes. So you did just if you could have chosen any week to have what do you call it?
Vision was only 30 minutes. Yeah, it was 30
yeah.
minutes.
So I'm sorry. Trust me when I told you got the edited version. It was a pleasure. So guys, thank you, the rest of you guys, for the patience of the reshet issue. Now we're going to be on 13b2. And we're going to go through this without too many distractions. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to share the Mishnah with you and do a share screen. This is going to help. Okay, just give me 1 sec. Okay. All right. All right, so guys, let's just go through the Mishnah, and it's going to come about. What we've done with every piece of Gemara is we take the Mishnah and we break it up section by section. So remember when we started, when I've obligated to God from doing damage, I've caused the damage. If I do not fail, if I fail to guard it properly. Remember then we were talking about incompetence, people that you gave it to that were either mentally deranged, a minor, or somebody that didn't have the mental capacity to follow through, both in terms of instructions and consequence. So there we dealt with that in the 10th daf. Then we dealt with if I'm liable to pay for that damage if I caused a portion of his damage. So do you remember what we dealt with there in the latter part of the 10th and the 11th daf? We were dealing with an issue of a pit. And the second person basically dug the rest of the pit. And we discussed a pit that was able to kill when the second person put it into a lethal pit compared to a second person just increasing the portion of damage. So that was that part unraveled. I'm just doing a bit of Chazorah. I'm obligated in the payment of his damage like one who caused all of his damage. So that we did with the pit. One is obligated to pay only in the case of properties that are not subject to the law of Me'ilah. So we've just finished that. Okay. Now we're going to be dealing with property. We did last week, Michael, on Friday, properties that belong to members of the covenant, and we discussed it excludes idol worshippers, etc. And privately held properties, what we said on Friday was basically that if there were communal properties and you couldn't exactly hone in on who owned the ox that damaged, obviously there was an exemption that applied. Now we're dealing with, in circumstances, one is liable for damage done in any place, except for the premises that is reserved exclusively for the damager, and on premises belonging to both the damaged party and the damager. So what we're going to see before we deal with these two issues is we're going to see that sometimes there's different ways to review the sentence. I don't know if you can see a semicolon here in point 17.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so what you can do is you can read that sentence according to Rav Elazar and Rav Chisda in two different ways. So in other words, if you read it, and we're going to come to it, I just wanted to show you at this point, it says, one is liable for damage done in any place except for the premises that is reserved exclusively for the damager and on premises belonging to both damaged party and damager. So when you read it as one sentence without the semicolon, what you can see is that it provides a almost the one part where it turns around and says, actually you're responsible for the damage because just like it's the guys, can you see me? My screen's just faded a second. Okay.
Yeah.
So in the one, if you have and on the premises belonging to both the damaged party and the damager, you are not liable. That's how the sentence continues. But if you read it according to the first one, it says you are liable, etc. So you can interpret it in two different ways depending on whether you put the semicolon there or not. So often when you have an argument in the Gemara, it's not a case of that they're just being obtuse and they're bringing the opposite point of view. They've interpreted the colon differently. Does that make sense? So it's like that old Jewish joke where it says there were boys that were swimming in a pool and they went to go and see the boys and said, don't you see that there's no swimming allowed? And the boys had put a comma after the word no. So it says, no, swimming allowed. So it's exactly the same here, is that if you want to use a semicolon, it basically allows for liability. And if you don't include the semicolon, it exempts for liability. Does that make sense? So it obviously determines how they read it, of how they're going to get this sort of meaning. And they're going to put other brises to support it. So we're going to obviously go back to that particular discussion. Now we're going to deal with the discussion about, are you able to see my screen at the moment on the Exodus?
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
now we're going to have a discussion about what happens if one's ox did damage and all of a sudden he went AWOL, meaning that all of a sudden he declares his ox ownerless, or he consecrates it to the temple and says it's hekdesh. So it deals with a case where obviously the one is just a damages action and the other one where it was a muad ox that basically killed a person. So I just want to show you here that it says in Shmot, chapter 21, verse 29, but if the ox was a habitual gorer from yesterday and the day before, and its owner had been warned but did not guard it, and it killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and even its owner shall be put to death. So why I brought this particular verse in Shmot was because the owner appears twice. It appears at the point of the crime, where the ox actually caused the damage, or it has to also be there where the owner has to be there for the trial and the verdict. Does that make sense? So what we're going to learn now is the owner's responsibility and where it stops. So I just wanted to bring this particular Mishnah. I'm going to stop in this particular verse in the Chumash, and I'm going to stop there, and we're going to go back to the Daf. It's going to make much more sense. All right, so the Gemara offers yet another explanation of the meaning of the rule regarding privately held properties. Ravina said, the Mishnah comes to exclude a case where an ox that gored and its owner subsequently consecrated it, or where the ox gored and its owner subsequently declared it ownerless. Okay. So basically what happens is, according to Ravina, the Mishnah teaches that the damaged party can't collect from the owner of the damaged ox unless he still owns it when the case comes to court. So the term privately held properties means, according to this, that the damager must be in possession of the same owner throughout the entire relevant period. So again, from the time of the damage to the time the case comes to court. That's according to Rashi's explanation of Ravina. Okay? And how did we see that? We saw that particularly from the word, and its owner had been warned. So in other words, at the time that the ox committed the crime, and towards the time of the actual judgment and verdict, because it said the ox shall be stoned and even its owner should be put to death. So in other words, what we're saying is, why does this have to do with privately held properties? Because it's his property, and if it's no longer his, it's very difficult to have any sort of court case. Do you remember before we had on Friday, Michael, when you read the review, that basically if you have an ownerless ox and you damage an ownerless ox, nobody is going to sue you. There's nobody there to sue you. Does that make sense? So there has to be a plaintiff and a defendant. The state is not draconian where they own everything. It's not a communistic state where the state is pressing charges against you. It's a civil case. It is a civil case. Okay. So even if an ox gored and its own, so firstly there was this issue with Ravina. So Ravina is talking about a case purely of damage, meaning that it's not a case where the ox kills. Okay, so this is a case purely of civil damage. Now we're bringing a brisa support for Ravina's view, and this is a brisa barav Yehuda. So here it's a case where the death penalty is imposed on an ox that kills a person. So Rav Yehuda basically said, even if an ox gored and its owner subsequently consecrated it, and it gored and its owner subsequently declared it ownerless, either one, the animal is exempt from the death penalty. For it stated regarding a mourmed ox, and its owners had been warned and it killed a man. Okay, so this teaches that an ox is not put to death unless the death of the victim and the standing of the ox before the court and judgment are alike. In other words, unless the ownership of the ox does not change during this period. So even though Rav Yehuda is talking about a case where it almost causes the death, and Ravina is talking about a civil case, they support each other in the fact that it has to be the same person that owns the ox throughout the period, from the crime to the actual judging of the ox. Now, I wanted to ask you something before we go on. There are two exclusions, as we said. What are the two exclusions, Gavin? Gavin? Are you on mute?
No, I'm off mute now.
Okay, what are the two exclusions? Gav?
If it happens in a communal, it's like shared space.
No. So, all right. So what I'm saying is, in what?
Ownless?
Yes.
Yeah, it's ownless. Yeah, if it's ownless.
Okay. So one is that it's ownerless. In other words, you declare it's ownerless. You say it's not my ox anymore, and then you wash your hands off for responsibility. And the second one is if you consecrate it and you make it hekdesh. Now, I want to just go through a couple of things that I was backwards and forwards discussing with Rabbi Cohen, and then obviously looking up. To me, this seemed incredibly unfair on first review. Why did it seem unfair? Because you're turning around and saying, all right, I caused a disaster here. I'm just going to wipe my hands off it and not be responsible. Off? Okay. So I'm basically going to wipe my hands off it. Now, does this seem fair on first glance?
Yeah, it's an obvious question. You can't just exempt yourself, one day and just say, well, you know what, it's not my car anymore. Sorry, I killed your dog. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't seem fair.
Mm-hmm.
So it bothered me. I mean, Gavin and I learned cases in Sanhedrin. Him and Ian Shapiro were going to write a book on how they could get off death penalty cases. And I remember once when you said to Rav Simcha Steinhauer that you've got a whole book, the two of you, he turned around to you and said, do you think you can get away with it? And Rabbi Yosef Mizrahi often brings this in his shiur, that he said that it's better to suffer the consequence in this world than to think you're getting out of it and then to wait in the next world and see what's waiting for you. You never get away with anything. You never get away with anything. You think you do, but you don't. And the reality is it has to look like you do. I'm sorry to go off on a philosophical point, but unless you have a perception that you could get away with it, there is no free choice. If every time you broke Shabbos, you get hit by a bolt of lightning or you go financially impoverished and things go wrong for you, believe me, there's no free choice. You're keeping it because you're seeing a direct consequence without delay to the avera that's being committed. So the whole point of free choice is not to see that there's a consequence immediately. Otherwise, there's no free choice. You can't have it both ways. So although it feels that an injustice has occurred, make no mistake, the person isn't getting away with it. Let's discuss this as a proof. You take a muad ox. A muad ox, the owner was warned many, many times. Okay. Firstly, it doesn't bring the example of a tam ox. Why? Because if you declare an ox ownerless or you give it to the temple as hekdesh, on a tam ox, what are you paying? You're paying on the gufar of the animal. You're losing the ox anyway. What's the difference? You're not going to declare it ownerless or give it hekdesh. Why? Because what you have to pay is the same as what you lose by declaring it ownerless or by making it hekdesh in the temple. Does that make sense with a tam ox? That's why it doesn't bring a tam ox as an example necessarily. It doesn't bring that, okay? Because you don't gain anything. You would gain in a case of a muad ox for a simple reason, is that you're paying from choice property or cash. So a person is more likely to get clever in that particular case. But what you don't realize, or the person doing it doesn't realize, is that there are two things that happen with the muad ox. That is, the owner's been warned. Firstly, do you remember that you can't use the ox for hanoah, for benefit? So basically, the ox is stoned. You can't get the ox for benefit hanoah, and you have to pay a kofar payment. Okay, so a kofar payment means you have to give. In Shemaim, they're holding you responsible for that death. Why? Does everybody know why you were held responsible with the muad ox for the death?
Because you were warned.
Yes, this was very dangerous. You were negligent. This wasn't a first-time occurrence. It had to occur more than 3 times, and you are responsible for having a dangerous animal. And if it killed, you were more than aptly warned, multiple times. So heaven is holding you responsible for that degree. Now, the kofar is in your benefit because you should pay with your life. It's almost like doing a kapora for Yom Kippur or doing an offering of a chatas offering. This is in your benefit. So if you're trying to get out of that sort of payment, who are you hurting? Yourself. And why should you entitled to be benefiting from the meat? Okay, why? Because your ox killed somebody. So why should you benefit? At the point where it's tam, okay, at that particular point where it's tam, you don't even benefit either way. Why don't you benefit? Because the gufar of your animal is going to the other party. So you don't even benefit when it's tam. So why should you benefit when it's muad? So how do you benefit? If the ox was stoned, that you could sell the ox and enjoy the proceeds. So if you can't even enjoy that benefit when it's tam, do you think when it killed a person you're entitled to that benefit? No, of course not. No. So the thing of it is, if you think you're insane enough to give it to Hekdesh, do you think Hashem wants the sacrifice of somebody that was negligent? Do you think it's going to help you? No. It's like a mafia. Exactly. It's like a mafia guy that kills and gives his money to the shul or the church or whatever the case may be to cleanse his soul, and he thinks it's, what do you call it, a spiritual laundromat, so that he's laundering his money so that it becomes pure. Hashem's aware of everything. That's dirty money. That sort of money is not appreciated. You can't steal money and give it to tzedakah. So to give it to Hekdesh is pointless. And to make it ownerless is pointless, because what you're doing there is you're basically not paying for it in this world in any way. You're not deriving benefit from it because it's ownerless, so you can't use it. You're not getting spiritual exoneration. You're not making restitution. You're not doing yourself any favors in any way. It's not like you're getting benefit when you declare it ownerless. So I know you'd say that automatically everybody would do this, but what benefit are you getting if it's ownerless? You can't use the ox. The fact that there's...
Can I ask you a quick question, David?
Yes.
Sorry.
Sure.
If you do restitution, you don't claim it ownerless, and you do restitution, and you pay the kofar payment, are you spiritually cleansed, or you still got a problem in Shemaim?
I think to a certain extent, it's not an I don't know if it would be, just this is my opinion, an automatic cleansing. Because I've always had this problem with the fact that you can automatically give a sacrifice and it absolves your particular issues. One of the things that a sacrifice is meant to do is make a person aware that they could lose their life over such a crime. And it's meant to shock them into a state of teshuvah where they're saying, why did an innocent animal have to die for me? You know,
so let me ask you just one final, just a comment.
Sure.
Why didn't they in those days kill all the oxes that were had just reached the Moed stage, just prior to reaching the Moed stage? So after they'd done it twice, and as soon as they'd done it the third time, slaughter them immediately or give them as a sacrifice.
Okay, so Kevin brings up an interesting point. It's not for the based in to do. What should happen there is that individual should wake up and see that this ox is dangerous, and he should take his ox to be shechted, because at that point he can derive the benefit.
Yeah.
And stop a killing. But this is my question. is that if he pays with the gufar of the animal, how does an ox ever become muad? Again, the ox committed an injury against somebody else, against another ox. You get rid of that ox, Marco, you get rid of that ox in order to pay with the gufar of the animal. How does it ever become muad? The only way it can become muad is that the person that takes it over that ox, then it strikes again under his possession. So I don't know if the Beis Din implied a law stating that the ox had to be shechted afterwards, and that value of that ox would pay towards the damages of the injured ox. Because if he just accepted that ox in terms of its live value, that ox is going to damage again. And that's the only way I could think that it could become muad. Otherwise, how could it become muad? It would, yeah, Malcolm?
No, it shouldn't become muad. I don't think it should become muad.
Marco, what did you say?
I think you should sell it.
I said, don't know if it's going
to consecrate it before.
Yeah, just hang on. Marco was asking something.
Sorry,
don't know if it's going to damage again. That's the whole point. If it's like twice in a third time, a third strike you're out. You don't know the result after the first incident. You don't know if it's going to damage again. It's possible. It's possible. Yes, it's got potential. It's possible, but the actuality hasn't materialized. So, you give it the amount of chances it's allowed by which Hashem has stipulated, but you don't know it's going to happen again after the first time.
I think it's right. And Gavin, even after the second time, for example, let's say the third time, because the fourth time it's muad, right? I think firstly it's changed owners' hands, and I think it's quite a complicated affair. So I think the original person doesn't know. But I think if the ox happens to be sold and you don't check out its history and you're purchasing it and it's created a wake of devastation in its existence, that there is a certain responsibility. But there is a philosophical question. If you could go back in time to Pol Pot or Mussolini or Hitler as a baby and they hadn't committed a sin yet, are you allowed to kill them at that point where they hadn't committed that particular avera? It's an old philosophical question. Do you get what I'm saying, Gav? To be able to preempt it. Yeah. So the truth of it is I don't know. But all I'm saying to you is that when this person declares it hefker, ownerless, or it becomes hekdesh, consecrated, they're not getting out of anything. It's not helping them. Because the kofar payment goes towards exoneration, because it almost bankrupts them, it's so expensive. And the fact that the ox is stoned, they can't get hanoah, this is meant to wake a person up spiritually. To the degree that they did teshuvah and they're forgiven, only Hashem knows. Okay, but it's not unfair, because at the end of the day, they don't get away with anything. All right, let me just go on.
This is a great, I'm just saying that the Moed, as it becomes Moed, it's a great opportunity to take it, to get consecrated using it. What's it, that Shalom one, that complete, the one Kevin was talking about, to do that, what's it called? Consecration, because it's best, it's good value for money. You're getting rid of it. It's going to Hashem, and you don't have any possibility of having these repercussions.
Yeah, you're saying before it's Moed, when it's like teetering on Moed. It's not quite.
Yeah, just on the border. Correct. Take it straight away.
The same person probably wouldn't own it, because the reality is, if my ox damaged your ox, you would take the ox in lieu of payment from the gufar of the animal. We've learned that. So the point of it is, the court must have had a history of an animal and gave it some sort of a marking or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the same person didn't own it, unless this was a case where it was a near scrape. In other words, what happens is, say the first time the animal did damage and clipped a person on the feet and did one or two damages, but the person decided not to pay from the gufar of the animal, but pay the owner cash, okay, because the amounts were small. He didn't necessarily have to sell the animal. Remember, it was there were two leniencies given. Tam was half payment, and B, you could sell from the gufar of the animal. So if it was a puny little thing, you could get away with saving a little bit of money. But again, an ox wouldn't have to cause the value of the gufar of the animal, and you could pay cash if you wanted to. It was a leniency given to you. So you could end up sticking with that same ox, but then you'd be retarded, because that ox was has it, believe me.
Yeah.
So let's make a little bit of progress, but I thought this was important to deal with it. We're just saying one other thing quickly. We've got like 10 minutes. The Brisa states that the ox must be owned from the time of the killing until its appearance in court. This implies it need not be owned beyond that time, but the Gemara challenges this implication. Do we not require until the verdict is announced? Because the words, the ox shall be stoned, that appear in this verse are written concerning the verdict. Hence, if, we're on 13b3 now, the mention of the owner at the end of the verse teaches there's an ownership requirement at the time of judgment. It should even apply to the verdict. So the Gemara actually agrees and amends the Brisa accordingly. The Rambam says that the Brisa should read as follows. The verse teaches that the ox is not put to death unless the death of the ox's victim, the standing of the ox before the court for judgment, and the verdict are alike, without a change of ownership. Does that make sense? Without a change of ownership.
Yeah.
Okay. Now listen, we're going to cut off a little bit early. We've got we've got only a few minutes, and then we can carry on. I know we've spent a little bit of time on this, but it is important because the minute you read a Gemara that doesn't sit well with your what do you call it? Your moral compass. We have to discuss it. I think it's important. I hope you didn't think that was a waste of time. But otherwise, it's just going to feel that there's no justice.
No, no.
All right. Good. So, guys, I know we're ending early, but it's not the end of the world. There's nothing further to discuss. We're going to hit a new topic next time. Thanks, guys, and I hope you have a good day. Hey?
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Damon.
All right.
Thank you.
Keep up.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes, guys.